his statement that the war was about NATO and that he understands Putin's point of view is by far the single most important statement that he has made or that any American leader has made in many, many years. It is the core truth. It is the core explanation of all that we've seen. We know it. You've documented it. We've documented it. We've discussed it for years. But like a taboo, it must not be said. And I discussed with you, I tried to get one op-ed into the New York Times for years to just say this. You know, space is free when it's online. I don't even care about print. Just give me 700 words. Couldn't do it because this is a taboo. You can't say that there was a cause for this war. And Trump said it clearly and accurately. And Moscow heard it, of course. And this is the basis for ending this war. It's always been the basis for ending this war. This war has always been about great power, security, and interrelations. That's what this has been about. This has been about whether Ukraine is a buffer between the U.S.-led military and Russia, or whether it becomes the battleground for who takes it. And the idea of Ukraine to survive, indeed to thrive, was we'll be neutral. Neither side has to attack us. Neither side has to worry about us. We will be neutral. And we will be very fortunate in our neutrality because we'll have good economic relations looking west to Europe. We'll have good economic relations looking east to Russia. We'll be also a bridge in between. And that is a wonderful vocation. And the United States broke it, deliberately broke it, because if there's one word in the deep state American lexicon that is hated more than any other word, it is neutral. If you're not for us, you're against us. Please, this is so important for people to understand. That is the American mentality. There is a deep record of this, and I'm talking about a record including of conversations in the Oval Office where the president is told, well, that one says he's neutral. Get rid of him. That was the case of Lumumba, for example, where Eisenhower said, get rid of him. The popular and elected first prime minister of independent Congo, now the DRC. And of course, the CIA was immediately tasked with poisoning him. Eventually, he was shot with CIA assistance. But because he was neutral, that's the dirty word. If you're an enemy, we understand you, but neutral, that's insidious. And so this is a long story. Trump said something absolutely true, like you say, very important in this case. If he will, and he might be able to apply the same reasoning that China has its interests in Taiwan, part of China, after all, that in the Middle East, there's another perspective on this. If he can apply that same insight and say it, and not have the men in dark suits come running to tell him how the world really is, it could be a breakthrough. It could be a breakthrough. Again, never hold one's breath when it comes to American foreign policy. But given the streak that we've been on, which is a streak of misery, war, and the one most amazing thing that you absolutely could not contemplate, you couldn't even design, which is to make America itself less secure over a period of 30 years to the point of grave risk of nuclear war. Well, the U.S. fools in this Washington blob have done exactly that. So we really need Trump to change direction. This is the main point.
Mm-hmm. Well, he does say he wants to do something which Biden has never done, and which you've pointed out many times has been a disastrous thing that Biden has never done. Biden has never spoken to Putin ever since the conflict in Ukraine began in February 2022. Trump says that he does want to speak to Putin. In fact, my impression is he wants to actually meet Putin. And that would be, I think, a significant step forward. He's also appointed an envoy, who is Kellogg. Now, Kellogg has all kinds of ideas. Maybe he's not the best person to act as an envoy, but he is nonetheless an envoy. He will presumably, since he's going to be having to act as an envoy, he's going to go to Moscow at some point. He's going to meet with the Russians. This is absolutely essential. It's the first step that has to be taken, both to bring this whole situation that we have in Ukraine under control, because it is almost out of control, and also perhaps to take a way forward. And I just want to make a simple point, which is that in the West, for the last 3 years, we've been acting as if we are at war with Russia, whilst consistently denying that we are. So we freeze their assets. We refuse to talk to them. We lob missiles into their country. We not just freeze their assets, but now actually are using their assets. We're actually lending money. We're doing things which actually, legally speaking, are acts of war. And we consistently say, no, actually, we are not at war. It looks to me as if, at least now, we're starting to get away from this terrible situation where we are in this essentially undeclared, denied war that has been so ruinous in terms of international relations. Now, where we're going to go from here, whether we're actually going to get a settlement, I don't know. Because firstly, there's all the problems that you say, a bureaucracy in Washington that is deeply hostile, bureaucracies across Europe, which disastrously are completely hostile as well.
So destructive of Europe. Unbelievable. Whatever it's doing to the U.S., it's destroying Europe. It's unbelievable.
Unbelievable. And of course, it's also coming desperately late in the crisis. I mean, at a point where the Russians are visibly winning the war, they may have less incentive to compromise and make concessions than they would have done had this happened, say, a year ago. But the very fact that we have a dialogue is a step forward, and we have ideas. I mean, not just from within the Trump campaign, and I think it was you who provided us with a very interesting position paper taken by somebody who I think works at the UN. I mean, he says he proposes all sorts of ideas. I'm not sure that all of these can happen, but he makes extremely good, very valid points about the UN Charter, about the provisions for self-determination in the UN Charter. He invites us, and I mean us, in the West, to rethink some of these dogmatic positions that we have taken. And again, if Trump and his people really want to move forward with this, there are plenty of good ideas that they can work with.
Let me pick up on several of the points you made. First, of all the things that we've done, the use of and active engagement of the United States in shooting missiles deep into Russia, the ATACMS and the others, is the most extraordinary and reckless action of this administration, bar none. it is tantamount to Russia having submarines off the U.S. coast and attacking directly the United States. And then would we say, no, they're not at war with us? Or would we be courting nuclear annihilation? Of course we would. That's what we are doing. This is a point that President Putin has, of course, made repeatedly, not just President Putin, but the entire Russian security apparatus. When attack and missiles are used, this is the U.S. doing the attack. It is technically the U.S. doing the attack. It is U.S. missiles, U.S. guidance systems, U.S. personnel, U.S. intelligence, all doing the attack. We are attacking Russia. And as you have pointed out repeatedly, of course, like every other detail of this narrative, this one was also a lie because it was approved in the spring of last year, and the American people were then given some phony excuse in the fall of an approved policy change. And of course, also like everything else about the United States, it was not publicly vetted, debated, reviewed, overseen by Congress. This is a decision of one person. And perhaps, by the way, because everything else was phony in the United States, that person wasn't even the president of the United States, who may not be compos mentis, because from what we hear, he's not. And so maybe this was Jake Sullivan that did it, or somebody else. It's unbelievable. And that's what they did. And so any one of these issues is enough to say, are we kidding? Are we really playing games this way to the point of, as the doomsday clock puts it, we're 90 seconds to midnight of nuclear Armageddon? We are playing games this way. Then I want to pick up on the no discussion point, because this is honestly worse than kids in a playground, having some brawl. You talk to each other. You figure out, at least your moms make you come together and say, talk to Johnny. You don't go on for 2.5 years lobbing missiles into them without a discussion. But there literally has not been a discussion. I was once asked to speak to the G20 foreign ministers when they were meeting in Bali. And it was a private Zoom, and I spoke to them about the war in Ukraine during the Bali, Indonesia G20 summit. They were not speaking with Foreign Minister Lavrov, who was physically present, but the whole point was we don't shake his hand, we don't take a picture, we don't have a side discussion. Again, worse than children. When I have said over the years they behave like children, my wife keeps correcting me that you're insulting children. This is something absolutely extraordinary. And then I think there's a basic point, and it's a very fascinating and deep point, and you have the experience, Alexander, as you've talked about as a mediator, and I've had the experience as well. The mere fact of talking to the other side actually brings you much closer to an agreement. And there's a fascinating, it's a huge body of psychological research in studying so-called strategic games like the prisoner's dilemma that many people will be familiar with. And the prisoner's dilemma is a setup where mutual cooperation is best, but there's an incentive to cheat on the other side. And so you put people together in this kind of setting, in an experimental setting, and you investigate. And if you are a game theorist, your prediction is people never cooperate because there's something wrong with this game theory. There's no human understanding embedded in it. So there's a so-called equilibrium concept that predicts no cooperation. Well, the only ones that don't cooperate, by the way, are typically are very low cooperation as economic students. But if you put nurses in a room together, they cooperate almost all the time. If you put other professions in the room, they cooperate maybe half the time. Now, here's the point that I want to make. If you let the people talk before they play the strategic game, so they can say to each other, yeah, we should cooperate with each other. What the game theorist tells you is, well, that doesn't matter. That's not binding. That's what we call cheap talk. That can't affect the outcome. Completely wrong. We are human beings. You put two human beings in the room, you let them have cheap talk before they play the strategic game. Cooperation soars to more than 90%. People say, yeah, I kind of like the other guy, or I trust him, or I don't really feel like cheating because we said we wouldn't cheat. Honest to God, this is the reality. No. Not the game theorists in the Washington blob that say you can't trust the other side, we have to hit them with missiles. That's insanity. That's not serious understanding of strategic relations, much less the stakes involved. So talking with the other side will make a huge difference, and that's not empty thought or do-goodism or whatever. That is the experience of real life. That is the experimental evidence overwhelmingly. It's also the demonstrated proof repeatedly of actual diplomacy. One case that I've studied my whole career and written about is the diplomacy between the US and the Soviet Union from the Cuban Missile Crisis through to the conclusion the following year of the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. What saved the world, literally in this case, because we were within a hair's breadth of nuclear war, what saved the world was that Kennedy and Khrushchev had a back-channel, direct, ongoing communication, which now we can read in full because it's collected, it's published, it's completely fascinating to read. And they sometimes lied to each other, they then rebuked each other, but it was a human relationship. Sometimes they warmly congratulated each other on election victories or on birthdays or on other occasions. There developed a genuine warmth between the two, but what was absolutely life-saving in the Cuban Missile Crisis was President Kennedy, almost alone and to the opposition of his military brass, which just wanted to go in and bomb, and his Air Force commander, Curtis LeMay, who was a complete madman, who basically, to Kennedy's face, essentially called Kennedy a coward and accused him of treason, in effect. Kennedy said, I understand that Khrushchev is in the same situation as I am, that neither of us wants war, but we're being pushed by our advisors and our teams and so forth, and I get it. And he and Khrushchev figured out how to pull back. It's extraordinary, but it was a human dimension to this. And with Trump, there will be a human dimension. Trump and Putin will meet, and Trump and Xi Jinping will meet. And they will actually, on that basis, make progress. And I would, it seems completely impossible and far-fetched. But if Trump and Pezeshkian, the Iranian president, met, this would also change history. Pezeshkian, who I met in September at the United Nations and had a very nice exchange with, is a heart surgeon. He's a decent man. He came with a message of peace. Of course, by the time our mainstream media mangled it, hid it, disguised it from view, everything was about war with Iran, the opposite of what Pezeshkian was saying in person. So if there could be direct discussions, that would be a world changer too.
I completely agree.
Trump's ability to even meet with Kim Jong-un. This is a huge strength, something that no one else is able to. And it's kind of frightening that how it's become normalized that our political leaders behave like 12-year-old girls in the schoolyard who try to freeze each other out. The idea that you don't talk. And whenever they're asked to explain this absurdity that diplomats don't do diplomacy, it's always this absurd notion that, well, we can't meet with the opponent because we can legitimize them as if, this is a thing. And of course, in the case of Ukraine, we know that to preserve the long war, there's always this fear that peace might actually break out from talks. But I think it's a wider problem, though, with the decline of diplomacy, because since the end of the Cold War, this is really when we stop talking to the other side. And it seems like it belongs to this hegemonic era, because usually diplomacy means we recognize mutual security concerns, we make compromises, but when there's a hegemon, it's always this idea of negotiating from strength. We demand unilateral concessions, and again, too much empathy and understanding for the other side is seen as being immoral, as it was. So, and I think, again, this is where Trump kind of won't celebrate too much, because he's got some, if you look from now, the statements about Panama Canal, Greenland, Canada, the Gulf of Mexico, there's reasons for concern as well. But at least you recognize when you have great power rivalry, you have to, peace derives from mitigating security competition. Then you have to address the security concern of the adversary. This is, again, also a big taboo now across the West. I cannot remember any media or politicians daring to discuss Russian security concerns. Again, this is fair to legitimize them and legitimize their actions. So we have to walk around all along pretending that this is just us standing up for democracy. And again, this is when we end up with this winner-takes-all solutions. It's very destructive. So
I think we should also point. I think we should also point out that there have been two profound failures, either of which, had they not failed, would have been enough to prevent this. One was the complete failure of American diplomacy, complete. The second was the even more shocking, ludicrous failure of European diplomacy. There is no European diplomacy. Borrell, who was the so-called high representative of the European Union, now gone, was nothing but a warmonger from morning till night. Nothing but a mobilizer of weapon systems and more war. He never had diplomacy between Europe and Russia. And now we have the same thing with Kaja Kallas, who is the new high representative. And I'm waiting for Europe to understand, and maybe Trump will concentrate the mind a little bit in Europe, that Europe has its own interest, because Trump's not going to be nice to Europe. And Biden was not nice to Europe. Biden was unbelievably destructive of Europe. But the European leadership was too blinded or too bought or too owned or too suborned or too stupid, I don't know, some combination, to understand that Europe's interests were completely lost in the last few years. Ukraine is by far the biggest loser, but the second on the list is the European Union. It is teetering right now. Every government is profoundly unpopular. They're all falling one after another right now because of this idiocy of Brussels policies. So maybe, God, it would be maybe a miracle too, but if Europe would open its eyes and say, we have our interests, we have our need for diplomacy, instead of running off to Kyiv as they do, as, by the way, Kallas did on the first day of the job, go to Moscow and talk to your counterpart and find a way for the region to be in peace. That would save Europe. And even if the United States goes off in a crazy way, that by itself would save Europe. But of course, what we hear from Brussels is exactly the opposite right now. Kallas says, whatever the U.S. does, Europe will continue its support for Ukraine. Well, This is, of course, ludicrous, not going to happen, absurd, empty rhetoric, but also from the point of view of diplomacy, so self-destructive of Europe. It's time for Europe to have diplomacy.
I completely agree. We've run, I think we're up to our time. Can I just say thank you from, again, Jeffrey, for coming to our program.
Always. It's great to be with you guys. Thank you every day for what you're doing, because you're bringing us the real information, the real analysis, and it hardly exists anywhere else. So it's great to be with both of you.
Thank you so much. And also, yeah, just a very quick comment. When you talked about neutrality, just remember Khan of Pakistan, when he visited Russia, he was accused of aggressive neutrality, and we'll see what happened to him. Anyways, I didn't mean to extend it. So thank you so much again,
Thank you.
Professor Sachs, Alexander. Great to see the both of you again. Let's do
See
it
you
again
soon.
very soon.